teacher for visually impaired, and a certified orientation and mobility specialist. I've been here for about 31 years, I think. And I show a great passion for calendars, this topic of calendars. And hopefully that carries me through in presenting to you today and helps with my confidence. But I do have a passion in the power of the calendar. We'll go to the next slide, Anne.
Yes, I am working.
Yep.
There we go. How's that? Look good?
Thank you. Yep. So just to acclimate you to how I have set up my slides today, I have the text on the left side and a lot of pictures on the right side, all that are fully accessible with the alt text. Slide numbers are on the bottom right-hand corner. So today, our calendar as a group, we're going to go through introduction to what a calendar is, the benefits, importance, and elements and considerations. I have several examples in pictorial form, resources and references, many of those, and questions and discussion. I will try to keep a hold of what's appearing in the chat. Probably a lot of the questions will be, and discussion will happen towards the end. I'll try to be mindful of the time. You will get a copy of the PowerPoint and you will get a copy of a resource and reference sheet that I put together. It's got a wealth of information that's not even on the PowerPoint, including things that aren't on the PowerPoint. So I think you're going to like that, having that in hand for reference. Next slide, please. So really talking about timepieces that all of us have, the traditional ones being, you might think of like a wall clock or your cell phone, a stopwatch, calendar on the wall, your agenda each day. Those would be more the traditional things. They're representation of the immediate past and future events. The past being the activity just completed, and the future is the activity about to occur. Next slide. So I love this. I love Minnesota Public Radio for one thing. And this is something that I heard on Minnesota Public Radio probably about 2 months ago. And I love these words, Blursday or Wednesday, spelled W-H-E-N. I have a link on the bottom that we're not going to take the time to open, but I am hoping and trust that you will do so. Blursday is a popular word to use when you don't know what day of the week it is. It captures the disorientated feeling that when everything is a blur. And I think all of us have felt that. And I included this in today's presentation because when you do trainings, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but trainings with teams to implement the calendar, I really feel like this is a great way to get everybody on board and to really have that personal connection and relate to the need of a calendar in everybody's life. And of course, including our kids who are deafblind or have multiple impairments. So please take the time to look at this. It's about a 5-minute long piece. It also comes in a written format if that suits you better. You will get to it on this link, and it's also notated on the quick resource page that I'm including. Okay, can we go to the next page? Dr. John Van Dyke. The use of calendars is based on Dr. Van Dyke's work. He's a world-renowned expert on deafblindness and multiple impairments. He really recognized the importance of anticipation and concrete calendars in everybody's life. Sadly enough, he did pass away in January of 2018. I was lucky enough to hear him speak, I think twice, maybe even 3 times. And actually, I was able to have lunch with him one day, and we talked. Just a wonderful wealth of information, anything that you can get your hands on, created by Dr. John Van Dyke. would be well worth the effort. I'm going to hold up a book that's available through your DeafBlind network members in your area, and it's called The Child Guided Strategies. He really looks at approaching his work from the child's perspective. So letting them guide the assessment, let them guide the session and the time together. He's often referred to as the godfather of inclusion of calendars and the teaching of deafblind children. And he really felt that the greatest strength of a calendar system is that it's an open system. So it can be individualized and used across settings and across different kids' needs. So in the home, in the work environment, and certainly in school. So anything you can get your hands on by Dr. John Van Dyke, we simply have to look at and really appreciate his work in setting the stage for calendars. Next slide, please. So why use calendars? So again, to think of yourself and really know that the importance of having a calendar and a routine and a plan each day, that helps for you to understand why it's so very important for our learners who are missing a lot of the incidental information during their day and need to have that structure, that anticipation, that predictability, communication opportunities galore, routine, confirmation of something, reflection, and comfort. That's everything I could come up in my mind, and I know there's a lot more reasons, but a calendar provides that and much, much more. There's a sample in the picture of a calendar. You'll see more of them coming up here. This is an object calendar, and it's a 4-place object calendar showing what the first 4 segments of the day will look like. This particular one used by this student has an all done or finished basket. It looks like a plastic weaved basket behind it, and it has a red outline around the top. So it's visually easier to see. And it looks like they pretty much are using whole objects for these representations in these bins that are depicted in the picture. Next slide, please. I want to stress this website more than anything. The National Center on DeafBlindness holds a wealth of information, fact sheets, websites, articles, videos, webinars, and of course our open hands open access OHOA DeafBlind intervener learning modules are hosted on here. Their educational practice page is so very, very valuable. Anytime you have to peruse through this link on the nationaldeafblind.org site would be well worth your time. And they go on to say on this site that calendar systems are timepieces that help children with deafblindness learn time concepts and vocabulary of what is going to happen, make decisions about their own schedules, and have conversations in which they can look forward to upcoming events and reminisce about the past. And so that is a very succinct definition, but please go ahead and look at this site. It will fill you in on so many resources, nice handouts that you can give to families and team members and teachers who are new to this, and really to put together booklets of information to help teams get on board and implement this system. Next slide, please. Again, the reasons for a calendar program. Using a calendar program with the child supports the development of communication, a wealth of opportunities in that area, provides emotional support and power, as well as teaches abstract time concepts and vocabulary. And you can see another example of a calendar system. This is a desktop one pictured on the right. And this comes from the Paths to Literacy site. And this is another site that provides a lot of information and a lot of supports as you and your team are implementing a system like this for your student. Next slide, please. And again, it's a strategy to provide structure and anticipation for a student who is deafblind or has multiple disabilities. That's structure and anticipation and know what to expect. What's coming up next? What am I done with? What am I going to do after that? So all of those time concept vocabulary words, so very important. And of course, they come in a variety of forms. The anticipation calendar, the object calendar we're going to focus on today, the daily calendar, weekly and monthly calendars. So as your learner is progressing in their knowledge and their use and their skills in all of these areas, of course, their calendar will grow with them. And that's what some of these refer to. We'll talk a little bit more coming up on each one of these. Okay, next slide, please. So Robbie Bleha's calendar book. What an amazing, amazing resource to have in hand for a team. And I actually take this book and I put it in the working folder in the classroom that the student is at if they happen to be in a resource room. I put team members' names on the front so that it's rotated and read and a checkoff list so that it is it's acknowledged that they have read that and looked at it a lot. It's an easy read, lots of pictures, and it backs up everything what Calendar Systems is. It's available on Amazon or the Texas School for the Blind and the Visually Impaired. It's about $39.95, depending on, it's in that area of cost, around $40. Robbie Bleha put this together about 40 years after the initial workings of Dr. John Van Dyke. As a young instructor and a young worker in the field, she went off of that and created this guide. And again, it's just an amazing piece to have in hand. Please know that your deafblind community network members, have a copy of this in their toolkit. So once you find out who that person is, please utilize that and get your hands on it. Best to have your own copy, of course. And I will say right now, whoever can email me first, and my email is there indicating that they would like this. I have one copy that I will be sending to you. Here it is. Again, an easy read, not really, really thick, lots of pictures and lots of information. So my email is on the bottom of this slide. And as soon as I get the first one, I will be sending that out to that lucky person to have in hand. But please do not forget your network members, and they have this in their toolkit available to share with you. Okay, next slide, please. So a lot of what you see in pictures coming up now, as an emergent reader, we often pair an object cue with an appropriate symbolic representation and exposes the learner to reading. And that's been my feel all along. A lot of the examples you'll see coming up have the object in the bin or the box. And then it also has a pictorial representation and the word above. Not everybody does it that way, and not all of my teams do it that way. But I really feel that it's important because we keep the same language between all of our team members. So when we're talking about bus, the representation for bus, we're not saying van or car or movement or leaving. We're using the same verbal representation. So I like it for that reason. I do like it for that exposing the learner to reading and having that available. So what we have done a lot of times, what I've done with teams, we've had the pictorial representation of the object that's in the box, even though the student is probably looking just at the box and interacting with the box and not really picking up that picture, but it is in the area, the vicinity, the sameness. And the word change in this example here, we'll talk more about this in a little bit too. I use the Dymo tape labeler. It's kind of that sticky labeler material that I put along the top, and we talk as a team about how we want all of this done. So in this case, it was the word change that we felt this student needed to have in the calendar. And so I always prefer the use of capital letters. You won't find that with everybody. And I'm not saying it's wrong or it's right, but I know it as a teacher for blind, visually impaired to be a more salient recognition of words. It doesn't have all the tail letters and all of the curlicues. It's easier to read. So I always do it in a label with all caps. And then you can't tell from this picture, but there is a clear Braille label over the top. Now, in this case, this student isn't learning Braille, and that's not my intention. Part of it is that I like to have that presence of the Braille because I found a lot of students have that connection from a sensory standpoint of just associating those bumps or the Braille with the words itself. And then also on my part of things, I like it to be more of a PR for Braille. So I like to really represent that Braille as another way of that language, not of that word. So changes in Braille and changes also in print on this particular card that's represented above the bin. Okay. I think that's it. Next slide. The ever important hierarchy. And this is in Bleha's book, page 14, actually. And I have it depicted in these two slides here. So we move from the most concrete to the most abstract. So for kids who are using visual symbols, we use the whole piece of the object for representation as much as we possibly can. And then we use a piece of it as they start understanding that, and the team feels there's an understanding of what that is. There's been a repetition, and then maybe even slice it down again. And then possibly going to a pictorial representation, and then a picture plus the label, and then maybe just the label only. And again, on page 14, it shows that in a very succinct way, a very nice way. One thing I want to point out, when we move to a smaller piece of, in this case, the towel, we started with the whole towel, we moved to a smaller piece. I always want to make sure that the student is part of the process of making that towel smaller. So if we're cutting that towel back, they're helping with that process in some way. They're always available to see that piece happening and to be a part of that participation in making that piece smaller. So it's not all of a sudden appearing in their calendar system as a small piece of towel, and they are magically supposed to know what that means. So making that available to the student to be a part and participate in that calendar change that's happening. Next slide, please. This is showing the hierarchy, again, from the most concrete to the most abstract when students are using tactile symbols. So the whole to a piece to maybe a corner, and a corner plus the label, and then the label only. So just following that complete hierarchy, that structure, that system put into place. And of course, as it gets smaller, we're able to do more things, but we don't want to lose the learner in that whole piece. So they need to be part of the process. Okay, next slide, please. Bus and swing. I have two examples here. These are pretty rough, and I'm exposing myself in a few different ways on pictures coming up to show you some errors or some roughness and ways that we've learned to make this better as a team for students in presentation. This was shared with me years ago. It's called GIMP, and it's a free website that you can upload pictures into it, and you can remove the background. So visually, you can see where that's important to have that background removed, less visual clutter. So you can see we used a seatbelt, and for this we represented bus by using seatbelt because the student is in a wheelchair or sitting in a chair that uses a seatbelt every time they get on the bus. And so they make that association. You build in that learning of what that object symbol means. And for the bus, for the seatbelt, I was able to get seatbelts, a whole bag of them from a salvage yard. They let, along with their people, they cut a whole bunch of seatbelts out of cars that were wrecks. And so they gave me a whole big bag of them. And so that's what we most typically use to represent bus. I'm sure other teams use different things. A lot of times we feel like, well, maybe why don't we use a tire? And if you can build in that representation and that knowledge for the student, that's terrific. I felt that the seatbelt was something a little bit easier to represent and make that connection with, that representation of bus. A lot of times people will think orange or something that they don't have a direct touching, the student doesn't directly touch or interact with. And that's another reason why not the tire, because they're not interacting with that tire necessarily as much as they could represent, have that representation of the seatbelt, something that they can learn and acknowledge as a representation of bus. So you can see the edges are very sharp and they're just not as pretty as the next slide, please. This shows that practice makes perfect. And certainly now we have better picture quality, and that certainly helps in every single way. So on the right, that picture shows a net swing, and we actually cut up a real net swing. And again, the bus representation of the seatbelt, which typically we cut right back very soon to make that association with the student. It works beautifully to do it that way. So sometimes we find the symbols that work really well for structure during the day that makes sense. And sometimes they become very abstract because we don't know what else to do, but we build that knowledge of what that representation means throughout the day. Next slide, please. I do want to point out in the resource page that you'll get, the quick reference resource page, I came across another free website. It's called Remove Background. And that address is on your resource sheet. And that's also another great tool for removing background. And then with this particular program, we can put different backgrounds in to add visual interest as you need to. So if you're creating books in Book Creator or some different purposes, that offers some options beyond even what GIMP provides. So those two programs put in your toolbox of things to use in supporting these types of strategies for our deaf-blind learners. We'll move into elements and considerations. So really looking at, when we're doing these, having the best visual color contrast, making that connection. And sometimes that might mean using a white box for the background. It also might mean using a darker box. And you can see in the picture, this happens to show a white box with the black channel in between. These happen to be from American Printing House for the Blind. They are soft for reasons of safety and for carrying around. But you can see the red ball just pops, and the blue ring just pops against that white. And then of course that black background, or that uncluttered background that's behind and underneath the system itself. This happens to be a two-part calendar system. Next slide, please. The next slide shows, I personally like to use plastic parts bin boxes. You can find them on Amazon. The link is included here. I like to find them at Home Depot a lot of times, or Menards. You can get them in different colors. I kind of stay with the black pretty much. They're fairly cheap, but they're very durable. They're very durable, and sometimes you need that for some of our learners. And through the years, things take a beating. And the durability of these parts bin boxes really lend themselves to a nice presentation and a nice lasting feature for use throughout the years with students. Next slide, please. And then the finished distinctive container. I typically like to use wicker baskets. This particular one I was able to find 2 of. I like to get 2 of everything, and it really came to be this year with at-home learning, distance learning, because we were able to replicate the same finished box at home. So in this case, it's the Wicker Basket. You want to try to get a wicker basket that will have some high visual contrast for the most part. This one is a soft wicker. It's almost a plastic weave to it. It works really, really nice. I went back to get more and they are like non-existent. So I'm looking all the time to have those, but I like to get 2 of things also because sometimes things get lost. And when they get lost, and it's the only one on earth again, then we're in trouble. So you like to have many of something that works real well. So you don't have to have all these changes in the all important pieces of the calendar system. So in this case, to the right, the finished box is the bin, the wicker basket, indicating it that it's finished. The next slide here shows elements and considerations. So those cards that I showed you placed up above, I actually got a system in place by using a spinnerbait box that I found at Fleet Farm or on, on Amazon. And so when these are kept very organized, they're quick for the intervener or the staff person, the teacher, the paraprofessional to access and to place and to keep in a nice, concise way that's easy to access and not be shuffling through a whole file folder of different things. So I like to use this particular storage box for that purpose. So I've bought a lot of those and they work really well. Next slide, please. This happens to be something that came up actually many times. And as a team, we talked about the word emergency, such as fire drill or intruder alert. Those are 2 things that come to mind. What do we do? That's not on the calendar. That's an emergency. It came up super quick. What do we do for that? And so our team came up with the idea of using this as a symbol. And as you might be able to see on the wheelchair, it's hanging on the wheelchair. So it's always available. If we're in the hall and moving around and something comes up and it's a quick emergency. We also have a second symbol that's with the calendar itself. So in a couple different places. The one on his wheelchair is on a ring that's easily detachable, or it can be taken off and brought to the child real quick. We also do a tactile marking on the upper back shoulder area, and that would be for the student that's in a wheelchair, that we can't access the middle of the back as easily. That's what we as a team came up with. It may be a little different for each learner, but this is what works really well for us. And we've actually had to use this. And so we feel pretty confident. You might wonder what's on that card in the form of an X. And that's actually a Brillo pad that I cut down to the shape of an X, that movement on the back of the back or on the shoulder area. And it's a very distinct feel that I have not symbolized in any way on the calendar. So it's not adversive, it's not pleasing, it's just a very distinct feel. So again, I just cut a Brillo pad in that, I think it was a Brillo or a scrubbing pad in that shape to put on this particular card, and it's always with him. Next slide, please. The change, we're back to this bin here. So change, that came up too. This is actually part of the calendar system during the day when you're going through it. The calendar change, all of us have change in our life every single day. Best intentions of having an exact routine schedule is great, but a change comes up. So for instance, we have a special speaker for the day and we didn't know about it till that morning. This allows for us to be able to represent that. Again, this is a grass turf sample that I found at Menards and I cut it down. Very different, very distinct, very high contrast. If I would have put this in the black bin, you would not have the contrast that this white bin, and actually I lined the black bin with white foam to make it pop out visually. And so the learner can see that right away. And so we talk and we actually teach change and emergency. Those are concepts we really felt that need to be talked about within a calendar system within the day for all of our learners. Next slide, please. So the hand under hand coactive approach. So many of us have learned the hand overhand. Hand underhand, I am a huge, I want that to be part of the language and part of what we use, and it's a coactive learning approach. The Nevada Dual Sensory Impairment Project really does a nice job of explaining that. I've included a ton of resources on this quick resource page that talk about this. And the hand under hand prompting tip sheet on the link here down below is a nice resource, a quick resource to give to parents, to give to teams. It's very important that we use that language. The next slide, please. I think we might have enough time to go through this. This is a kind of a spoof of a video that I use with teams. It's funny in many ways, but it really goes and talks about hand under hand versus the hand overhand method. And it's called hand under hand versus hand overhand with Carrie and Ben. This is found on the Texas School for the Blind site, and I have that on your resource page. I did not put it on this slide. Anne, could we play that, please? It's about 5 minutes long. There should be sound. I'll go ahead here. I don't know if we can get the sound or not. Oh, no sound, just captions. So just a little bit of this video. You can see how she's dipping his hands right in the water and talking about that, squeezing and wringing out the rag, all totally hand over hand, guiding him, but not guiding him, pushing him back to the table to use a patterned approach. And she's very commanding. He's laughing a little bit just because he's an adult and he knows what they're trying to show to the viewer. But it is a fun way to show that hand over hand. She's guiding his hand, but she's just really hand over hand, doing the patterned wiping of the table, jamming his fingers and his hand into everything that he comes in touch with. And I think what we'll do is go out of this video if we could, Anne. And I'm going to hope that you take a look at this. This is a wonderful, wonderful little video presentation to give to teams to really drive home the point of the importance of hand under hand guidance, not the hand over hand, and to be available to the learners and to let them guide that movement. Next slide, please. So the ever important pause is a little handout that I've got there. It's from the Texas School for the Blind. It's an article talking about giving that wait time that we need. For a lot of our learners need a lot of wait time. Also often we present something and if the parent is there or the paraprofessional, they might want that student to be successful and do it quickly, so they'll interject or they'll interrupt the learning opportunity. And also often if we just give the 30 seconds to respond or more, I always say that it needs to be uncomfortable. It needs to feel uncomfortable to me to wait that long. And so many times I've been surprised where the student responds, and I feel bad that if I would have interjected or made the response for them, or interrupted that learning moment, that would have never happened for them. So please know that the ever important pause is very important, and we need to provide that wait time for our learners in every part of their day. Next slide, please. To start, presenting one item, and then to the right, the activity is finished. And then 2 or more items, we talk about time concepts, learning and understanding that anticipation, and then now we do this, and then next is this, and then all done. So you can see the difference in the textures of the 2 baskets or bins, that calendar bin, and then to the right, this team decided to use a wire wicker basket that's not a wicker basket, but a bin. It's a paper basket that is not used for anything else in this child's life, but for that all done, that finished aspect of their time, their calendar. Next slide, please. So I do want to talk too about the importance of training. I always set up training with teams. And again, I really drive home the point of reading the calendar book and becoming familiar with that. I think you'll see in all these examples coming up that I have that they all look similar. They're not exactly the same. And I'm a firm believer that if you understand the philosophy and the teachings of what the concept is, then you look at the individuality and the needs of the student and what they may need for their particular calendar or their learning instance. Team meetings are so important. With our kids in our district, at least, when we have kids who have a lot of needs and a bigger team, and they're very complex, I actually have written in the IEP, and I'm going to read this to you. It's a piece that talks about team planning meetings. So we call them team planning meetings. They're just casual meetings. They're not meant to be time constraints on anybody that they have to be there. But the verbiage that I use in the IEP is that these meetings will be scheduled at the beginning of the school year to be held approximately every 4 to 6 weeks. All team members will be encouraged to attend and participate in order to ensure cohesive and ongoing planning, support, instruction, and consultation across all service areas, environments, and team members. So that's a lot of words, but basically it really has helped to get everybody around a table and talk about possibly the calendar and maybe having a new piece to the calendar or the classes that the student is working on and how they will participate. There's just a wealth of different things. When you have everybody at the table, you can then start talking about meaningful programming and getting everybody's participation in that programming. In this particular example, my student here, we're using a trapezoid table, a trap table, and it's adjustable. He's a student that's in a wheelchair. And this allows having this trap table at the proper height. He's able to visit his calendar in the morning and several times throughout the day, actually, and go through his 4-place calendar system that he has and talk about, first he has his locker, then he has computer time, then he has music, then he has health. And those are the 4 object representations that are depicted, along with the pictorial representations up above and the finished basket to the right. In this case, we have the storage boxes down below. That really, really helps. And you may or may not notice I have a black background. It's actually an Invisiboard from American Printing House for the Blind. A black science fair project board is the same, close to the same thing. In this case, it'll provide the same control of visual distraction. So the focus is on those 4 bins as much as we can make it be, and the needs of that student visually also. The next picture I'm going to show you is going to look very visually busy. Next slide, please. It shows the back, the side view. So we have all the extra doodads You can see the card storage box, extra objects in the back. We have a weather stick, some other various things in the back, but totally out of the visual of the student who is on the left side of that facing it. So the intervener or the support person is able to access those things behind the Invisiboard, behind that board, but visually the student is approaching that that area from the last slide that you've seen. So looking straight on. This really works well for having things easily accessible for the person who's supporting that learning. Okay, next slide, please. This shows, this is a different one again, but it still has the philosophy of a calendar system and the structure of a calendar system. For this particular learner, he needed to be standing, he needed big movements, he needed to be all done and make that cross midline effort across his body to put it in an all done basket. It's all magnetic. And so this board is magnetic and all the tiles are magnetic with symbol representations that he fully understands on them. So we are past the whole object representation and we are to the parts of the object. And so down below the red line is meant to be his interaction area. And of course it is, it's mounted on the magnetic backing at a height that is good for him, both visually and accessible. This student happens to be totally blind. So from left to right, you can see the 4 places that he has next in his day and talking about each of those things. The next thing being for him, the current thing is eating and then bathroom. And then he will go for a walk and then bathroom again. So that's his things. Above that line is a storage. It really helped for our team to have things that were readily available that could be pulled down and talked about into that working area underneath the red line for the student. So again, this student is totally blind. This kept all of the objects that were immediate to his day, easily accessible. His working area is below that red line. Next slide, please. So here's showing the whole thing. We'll go back. Oh, yep. So what I just showed you on the left was his actual working area. His all done or finished is that tan basket. It's a office supply basket that he crosses midline and he puts it in the basket when he's all done. You'll see some tiles way, way up above out of his reach, and certainly he's not able to see those, but they're quick storage for other days of the week for objects that we need to have access to quickly. Hopefully that makes sense. That's a pretty unique calendar system, but it has worked for him for years, and it's been a nice piece for him to have in place. And it provides him comfort. He has a lot of anxiety, and knowing what's coming up and what's expected of him, and certainly not fighting that he does not like going maybe to speech. We can say, check your calendar, what's next? And he already has lined that calendar up in the morning, and he really has that internal knowledge that that's coming up. It is coming up. It may not be his favorite thing. Sorry, speech people, but it is coming up and it will be followed by the next thing. It's part of his routine, part of his calendar. Next slide, please. Here's a close-up of his all done or finished. A lot of times we'll just say finished. You can see kind of through the weave there, his locker representation is the shank that we've cut off of a lock. He used the whole lock at one point, and now he recognizes it by just the shank of the lock itself. Next slide, please. Here's one just showing, I'm just going to show a whole bunch of examples here. So you can see book representation, swing representation, bus was the end of the day. So this was the last 3 things during this particular student's day. Next slide, please. This happens to be for a student who is homebound. We had to get pretty creative in how we stored this, but you can see that she's using a single box right now and talking about that. Her all done happens to be on top of her storage area that we can roll away and get out of sight. But the all done is the green wicker plastic basket. We added the definition both tactually and visually of the yellow pipe cleaner around the top. So you can see the things that she's done with is her silver pom-pom, which was her morning routine. Next slide, please. This is showing it all put together and done. So it's in storage right now, and she had a black one and a white one for use for different visual contrasts that she needed. Next slide, please. This is a portable one that I put together during distance learning. This one went home for a student who was using 4 bins. He actually used that wicker basket as his all done that was shown in a previous slide. All of this is mounted on a blackboard, and it can be carried around totally for him. And it worked real well in the home setting. Instead of having such a big setup on a trapezoid table, he was able to continue with his work on using the calendar and using that representation that he used at school, the same exact thing. Okay, next slide, please. This is showing one for a student who's in a wheelchair. His anchor color, we called it, he's got cortical visual impairment. He really gravitated to the color yellow. So I mounted it within a yellow tray. He was using a 2-place system. So when he came to school, the bus for him was something that we were able to support his learning of using the seatbelt, that representation. And then he would do a hearing aid routine with the nurse because he had a hard time with his hearing aids. That's a whole nother thing. But then you can see his finished basket is to the right. We could take this yellow tray and take it down to his wheelchair tray, and he had it right in front of him. So it was all very portable. Next slide, please. This is showing the setup again in a bigger view. So we had it on the side counter, and he would go alongside the side counter and we would bring it to his wheelchair tray. So all the storage, all the pictures were there for the adults in a neat fashion, so easily accessible. But his working area was that yellow tray that was brought to his wheelchair. Okay. This shows a uncluttered space for a calendar. It's accessible, it's consistent, and it's kept neat. Oftentimes I find that a lot of people will come in that workroom or that work area. There's a nice clean table and they put their notebooks there, or worse yet, their coffee there, or their pop there, or their snack there, or their textbooks there, whatever it may be. I decided to get around that by putting over the light switch a picture of a nice, clean, accessible workspace. And so I put a big red check mark and showing the picture of how it should look when each staff person leaves that area, so that we're reminded that that's a respected area and it's a work area for that child with visual impairments that we need to keep safe and free of visual clutter and distractions. Okay, next slide. This is a portable one in a wheelchair. On each side, you can see these, they're purse organizer bags on each side of the mounted tray in the last slide. And I'll go ahead with this one. Well, you can see so the working left to right, the child would take the card out of the object out of the one on the left to the tray. And then what she's currently going to or doing is presented on that Velcro piece on the front. And then when it's all done, it goes to the right side in that pocket that's attached to her tray. Okay. The next slide shows an adjustable calendar. So it's on a book rack system. And for this, it allowed us to be able, the student was often in his stander or tall kneeling or a variety of different positions. And we were able to, when it happened, bring that calendar to his height. So it was a real nice piece because we were able to know that he was getting it visually at the height that was available and best for him. Next slide. This shows another calendar. This student needed a working space on the front of the trapezoid table. He approached it in a wheelchair. He grabbed a lot of things and he threw a lot of things. We actually bolted it to the table itself. That really worked real well. I have notated on here, these are some errors on here. We have a lot of things going on here. I will point out that the tambourine for whatever reason, they were using that open area on the end as a finished area, and that got to be cumbersome. It wasn't portable, and it was pretty much the same tactual. That was one thing I did not like about this particular system, and it's really nice to be able to reflect back on past work and know that none of it's perfect and there's always room for improvement. We're getting better as we practice. Okay, next slide. This has lots of errors. This is magnetized on a file cabinet. We were working in basically no space in a Montessori learning area, an office area. So you can see the finished box on top of the cabinet is the same color as the actual calendar system itself. That probably wasn't real great. And also the same texture, the same plastic smooth material. Another thing that happened quite often is that objects were left in that finished container, a lot of them, which really was cumbersome and a lot of visual clutter, and it really did not help in discussing with the student things that were done, because there were a lot of things in there. It just had a lot of fixing to do, and we did fix it after that, but it helped to be able to bring these pictures to the team and discuss those kinds of things. Okay, next slide, please. And these are showing other examples. So a wide variety, and you can see all the different ones. There's monthly ones, there's weekly ones, different object schedules mounted on different things, but all of them have the same belief and the same philosophy and same understanding structure system of what a calendar system is and what it provides for a learner. So please know they could look quite different depending on the open system that Van Dyke cites, that it can be very pliable, very changeable, but really understand the system itself and what it provides. Next slide, please. So the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. So please do, and please know that teams, these things are just as good as the people implementing them and understanding them. So as much as we can get the knowledge behind this and the things in place and really get to know our students and their needs, what they're telling us, one of the things that I found teams like to do is represent every single thing happening during the day. So you could have a calendar system of 21, 30 items, which is ridiculous. So to really look at those compartmentalized areas, structure of the day, and talk about it as a team, not just one person, and decide what makes a good calendar system for your particular learner. Next slide, please. So again, here's my contact information. Nothing can stop me now. I hope you feel that way. It's a terrific strategy. Certainly the background established on it with Robbie Bleha's book and Van Dyke's book is worth noting in every single way and really understanding and becoming familiar with. Next slide, please. I see something that says in the chat box, do you just start with one object? Yes, most often, yes. And then you build upon that. Again, talking with all your team members and looking at that learner's understanding of anticipation and routine. Are we ready to grow? Are we ready to go on to 2 objects, to 3 objects? Another resource, Ann Mays at the statewide DeafBlind project, the specialist there, all of her contact information. And also your Minnesota DeafBlind Community of Practice representatives with the toolbox. The toolkit, they have a ton of resources and are readily available to you. If you do not know who that person is or people are, talk to Ann, please. Still more resources, the project website, the low incidence project website. Want to call this one out for sure. This has low incidence, it's relatively new. Low incidence supports, websites, handouts, everything in that area that you will want to become familiar with. It's well worth your time to explore that website. And again, the National Center on DeafBlindness website. And that would be it. I don't know how much time I might have to answer questions.
Unfortunately, we're out of time for questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll have people, I'm going to be sharing Doreen's PowerPoint for PDF. And she also was very kind, and she created a list of resources. So that is all the things that she's referenced. She's put on one comprehensive document, and I'll also be sharing that out with you. So I just want to thank you, Doreen. You have done an amazing job pulling all of this together and sequencing it so it's understandable. It's, you know, helping lots of people, like you said, taking the time to meet with your team members makes a big difference. And I know we're all pressed for time, but when we invest that little time at the beginning, even if it's just consistent, even if it's maybe once a week for 10 minutes even, just reaching out, emailing, communicating, it makes such a difference for deaf-blind learners. So I want to thank you for pulling all that together in the middle of COVID. I mean, you were willing to do that. That was just amazing. So
You're
you're
welcome.
doing a lot of great presentations, amazing. We really, really appreciate that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a break.